I'm Pat Leach, Director of Lincoln City Libraries. I am so grateful to live in a community that values education. The One Book, One Lincoln program is a perfect example of what libraries do to extend education throughout the whole community and through a lifetime. Think of all the conversations you've had with people about books, how you expand that solitary reading activity when it becomes more of a community activity. This is the 19th year for the One Book, One Lincoln program. 19 years of those conversations about books that make us think. 19 years of book groups embracing, reading, and discussing the One Book, One Lincoln titles. 19 years of reading, bringing our community together. We're about to announce the 3 finalists for the One Book, One Lincoln program. You will have a chance to vote on the one that becomes the featured title. Voting extends until the end of July. I ask you to read them, to vote on the one you think should win, and also to have your friends do so. And now I'd like to introduce the man who has facilitated our One Book, One Lincoln selection process for several years. He's done so as a volunteer labor of love, and he's done so brilliantly. It's my pleasure to introduce David Smith.
Thank you, Pat. It's great to be here today. For those of you who don't know much about the process for One Book, One Lincoln, let me tell you a little bit about that. One Book, One Lincoln has really become a year-long process. Some of you know this, others may not. You can nominate a book at any point during the year from February through January of next year for our next One Book, One Lincoln. All the one books that are nominated come from our reading public, from the community here in town. Come January, end of January, the library looks at the books that have been nominated, make sure that they can be accessed. They're available in multiple formats. And then they forward that list to the One Book, One Lincoln Selection Committee. There are 18 of us on the committee, almost all community members. A couple of the library staff are on the committee. We meet from February to beginning of April, and during that course of time, each member reads up to 20 to 25 books in that process. A little overwhelming at times and too much time to read that many books, but we find that most everybody on the committee loves the excuse to be able to read. Each meeting that we have, we winnow that number of books that we start with down. We try to half that number until we get to the top 10. At that point in time, everybody reads each book. And then we have a great meeting where we do a discussion of each and every title and consider which 3 actually would be best to forward to our final 3 for the community to vote on. Obviously, this year was a little bit different in that process. When we got through with our second meeting, we needed to not meet together. And so we did a lot of our discussions digitally. And in some ways, it was very rich discussion as people had the opportunity to really think through their reasoning about which books to advance. And so now, I'm going to announce to you the top 3, the final 3, One Book, One Lincoln titles for 2020. Book number 1, Dear Edward by Anne Napolitano. This book was inspired by the 2010 crash of an African airline headed towards Libya. The plane crashed and only one 9-year-old boy survived. But Anne Napolitano has taken and fictionalized that account so that it takes place here in the US. It begins one summer morning when 12-year-old Edward Adler, his brother, and his parents all board a plane for Los Angeles. They're moving there. They're a little disgruntled. The boys love New York. The family has loved New York, but there's a great opportunity there. They board that plane with 183 other passengers. But halfway through that flight, the plane runs into bad weather. There's malfunctions with some of the equipment on the plane. There's miscalculations by the pilots, and that plane crashes. 186 die. Edward becomes the only survivor. Though badly hurt, both emotionally and physically, after his time in the hospital, he goes home to his aunt and uncles, who he has not had a strong relationship with up to this point in time, and he's left to think about, how do I proceed with my life? How do I reintegrate myself? The book carries forward from there. It's a very interesting book in that it alternates from chapter to chapter, flashing back to that airplane flight. We get to know people from that flight that weren't a part of the family, and how they, in the future, their family members come to impact Edward's progress towards full health by the end of the book. Though it may sound a little bit bittersweet, in truth, there's a very hopeful ending. And for those of us going through COVID-19 right now, I think a lot to be learned about how to survive a great misfortune, and how to come out on the other side in a much better place. Our second book, an author that many of you will find familiar, Ann Patchett. You may remember her from the 2003 One Book, One Lincoln, Bel Canto. She was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize with this year's second book, The Dutch House. The Dutch House takes place at the end of begins at the end of the Second World War, when Cyril Conroy combines luck and a single investment to become to create an enormous real estate empire. This propels his family from poverty to enormous wealth, and his way of marking that is to buy this glorious estate that's referred to as the Dutch House. He surprised his wife with it and his family, but much to his chagrin, things fall apart at that point in time. His wife abandons him. He becomes disconnected with his kids, and then he marries a second wife who becomes almost an evil stepmother. The story is told from the point of view of Danny, Cyril's son, and he and Maeve, his sister, find themselves suddenly exiled from the house, thrown out after his father dies, and his stepmother decides there's no room for them there. The siblings find themselves in great misfortune, destitute almost, with a slight twist that I'm not going to share with you. They go on, and through their bond, manage to dig themselves out from that destitution, but never quite forgive the stepmother or their father or the mother that abandoned them when they were children. Throughout the story, the siblings always go back to that house, the Dutch house, because it holds so many memories for them, both good and bad. And through some twists and turns towards the end, they have to decide whether they proceed with their lives positively or whether they continue to attempt to suffer in that misery of the past. Third book, our nonfiction title for this year is Bad Blood, Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup. This is the true story of Elizabeth Holmes, the CEO of Theranos, a startup corporation that she began that dealt with testing blood through a compact sort of way. One drop of blood could produce hundreds of tests, test results. She was heralded as the female Steve Jobs. She was brilliant. She became cover of many magazines. She was on the cover of many magazines. She was able to get billions of dollars from moneyed, famous people for her startup corporation. And by 2005, supposedly that corporation was worth $9 billion. She herself worth $4.5 billion. But the only problem was the technology didn't really work. For almost 10 years, Holmes misled investors, the FDA, her own employees. Until one day when John Carreyrou, the author, a Wall Street Journal journalist, was contacted by one of Holmes's former employees and told the story of what he thought was happening with that company. Carreyrou dug into that story, found out the truth, and despite threatened lawsuits from Holmes, despite a lot of manipulative behaviors, the Wall Street Journal published numerous articles to expose her. Bad Blood represents the biggest corporate fraud since Enron, and it's evidence of just how important a free press and a moral, ethical survival of our society is dependent upon that free press. 3 great titles. We hope you're enthused about them. Remember, you've got June and July to read and to vote, and our final one-book title will be officially announced on Labor Day. Next up, Caitlin Lombardo. She'll be sharing a little bit of information from the library. She is our coordinator of One Book, One Lincoln.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Lombardo. This is my first year as coordinator for the One Book, One Lincoln program, and boy, what a year did I get. This year we'll pose some unique challenges, but I think we're up to it. Some of our programs will be virtual. We'll have virtual book discussions, things like that. Some of our programs will get you out into the community and exploring Lincoln, and some of our programs will get your creative juices flowing. I do want to thank our selection committee for all the hard work that they did. I want to thank our programming committee for helping us come up with all of these great ideas, as well as Pat Leach, our director, and Gail McNair, the executive director of Foundation for Lincoln City Libraries, who will also have a few remarks.
The Foundation for Lincoln City Libraries has been in existence for over 60 years, and it's thanks to the generous support of many people from Lincoln and throughout Nebraska. The Foundation is able to support the programs and services of Lincoln City Libraries. Whether we're buying a book or providing new computers or supporting a community-wide fun program like One Book, One Lincoln, the Foundation is in existence and successful thanks to all of you. So we invite you to be participating throughout the summer in One Book, One Lincoln, and we look forward to seeing you either online activities or in-person activities throughout the summer. I also want to thank the hosts of The Mill, who typically host Coffee on the Dock for The Mill, to make these announcements. So thank you for Dan and Tamara Sloan, and they also look forward to seeing you. So here's Pat Leach.
I want to thank Lincoln for its support of One Book, One Lincoln. I have read all 3 finalists. I recommend them to you. I can't wait to talk with you about them. And now let the One Book, One Lincoln reading begin. Thank you.